Every self-loathing classical musician's favorite mantra is, "Classical music is dead!" And it's true. At least in this video, where we'll be listening to a bunch of dead pianists play pieces by dead composers. Yet, it's kind of a paradox, because in their hands, this music never sounded more alive. Over the next hour, you're going to hear recordings of 20 pianists from the early 20th century, the so-called golden age of piano playing, a window into traditions of music making that thrived in the late 19th century, but were mostly extinguished after the World Wars. You might love some of the recordings you hear, you might hate others. But if there's one thing that's true about musicians from that era, they won't leave you feeling neutral. So stick around and get ready to rediscover the music of Mozart, Schubert, Chopin, Liszt, Brahms, Rachmaninoff, and other great composers, played in ways that will make your piano teacher blush.
All great piano teachers said, you have to know the sound in your ear, and you have to hear the sound you're trying to produce before your hand touches the key.
That's Mark Ainley, a guru of historical recordings and one of the leading experts on Golden Age pianists.
Most of them were taught to compose as well. So they had a different relationship with scores, understanding compositions from the inside.
I enlisted Mark to help build this playlist of Golden Age recordings and offer some comments to help orient your listening, since
we're not taught how to listen. And I wasn't taught how to listen. I was reading Harold C. Schoenberg's book, The Great Pianist, and I was noticing the words he was using, and I bought records of those pianists, and I listened, and I tried to, hear what he was pointing to.
Now, there's no school of piano playing that ever went under the banner of the Golden Age. In fact, these pianists are more different than they are similar, showcasing arguably more stylistic variety than you hear among pianists today.
And it wasn't love at first listen, notably Alfred Cortot and Joseph Hoffman, both of whom I adore now. I didn't quite get them immediately. It was so radically different. The conception, the sound.
What unites them all is this moment in history when recording and playback technologies were still a novelty. For the most part, these old school pianists had to learn music just from the notes on the page, without referring to recordings. And that required them to use their individual imaginations. It's kind of like the difference between reading a novel and seeing the movie. The former requires you to interpret and bring to life the story in your mind.
A number of things that I think were paid attention to back then. Balance of voices, subtlety and changes in the dynamic level, pedal effects, slowing down to make some emphasis, like the pause I did just there.
Mark is the creator of the Piano Files, which is now 16 years old and still going strong. And there on the original Facebook page and YouTube channel, you can find a treasure trove of recordings with Mark's original research and commentary. Indeed, all the pianists you'll hear in this video, Mark has profiled in depth. So if you're so inspired after watching, follow the links in the description to explore even more of their artistry on the Piano Files.
The point of the music is not just the notes. It's like, what's behind the notes? What does Hamlet mean when he's saying to be or not to be?
And since I can only air short excerpts from each of these pianists here, I've put together a YouTube playlist with every recording featured in this video, so you can go listen to the full interpretations from each of these intriguing artists.
Piano notation and the piano keyboard itself is black and white, but we're really aiming for color, a full range of emotion and creativity. And that's at least what I hope people can get listening to these recordings, is some inspiration. I'm like, oh, actually, that sound is possible on the piano. I never heard that before.
Let us know which recording is your favorite or least favorite, what pianist you love or can't stand, and of course, who you think we left off the list. And Mark and I will see you in the comments. Now, without further ado, our first pianist, Moriz Rosenthal.
Well, one of the reasons he's so important is he studied with Franz Liszt. Rosenthal was fiery, and what we're going to hear is a broadcast recording of a piece that he also made a studio recording of, his teacher Liszt's famous, once ubiquitous, Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. It's so radically different from the studio recording. The studio recording is 7 minutes, 47 seconds, and this one's 10 minutes. So he really takes his time, and he adds all kinds of extra bits, and that is what Liszt expected. It's actually documented that when Liszt had trills or he had certain figurations like that were repeating, it was up to the pianist to decide how long to continue that. So if you're just doing what's printed in the score, you are actually not doing what the composer wanted, and you're actually doing what the composer didn't want. He was born in 1862, not last century, the century before. This should be absolutely mind-blowing, the fact that we're able to listen to that and have this, sonic time machine to be able to go back and tune into and get some signals, some sound waves coming to us in present time from so long ago. It's absolutely incredible.
Ilona Eibenschütz.
Started studying with Clara Schumann when she was 13. Liszt was too old to teach her, but said there's a great future for her. And because she was around Clara Schumann, she was around Brahms. And Brahms apparently thought she played his music better than anyone. In 1952, she recorded on the BBC talking about having known Brahms and having heard this concert and having heard that concert. And let me play you a little bit of this. And hear the playing. And she's playing, Brahms' Fourth Ballade, Opus 10, at double the speed that we would normally hear. That lightness and that long line and the soaring phrase, it's not dense, it's not heavy, it's not weighty. I think everybody seems to think that, because Brahms was a big guy with a big beard, that somehow his music needs to sound heavy. It's like, well, where do people get this impression? And so this is, I find, absolutely fascinating. She's a really remarkable pianist. Everybody should listen to the complete talk on YouTube where you're listening, you're hearing the direct voice of somebody who had extended conversations with Brahms. And when she was not even 20, he said, I want to play you some pieces I've just written. And he premieres for her privately his Opus 118 and 119 before anybody else had heard them. He insisted that she be alone in the room and everybody else was kind of outside, sort of like wondering what's going on. And she then gave the world premiere. She retired from public performance when she got married in 1902, but she lived to 1967. She was, in her 80s when she recorded that, and it was not meant to be published. It was just done for private use.
So in a way, it's her memory of a piece that when she was a young girl, she once heard Brahms, more or less at that age, although not quite 80, also play. And so this is part of the, oral tradition.
That's it.
The oral and the oral tradition aspects of what we do. And recording is both a protagonist and the enemy. And I'd say he's the villain, but also recording is the means by which we can even be talking about any of this. So there's a kind of cloud of irony, I think, floating above them.
100%. I think recordings have probably done a lot of damage to our perception of music and to concert life. And they can simultaneously, when we use them well, reveal so much of the kind of individuality that because of recordings we're now no longer hearing in concert.
I hope you're enjoying this video, and I hate to interrupt, but in case you're really into it, check out the unabridged 2-hour listening session this video is based on, featuring lots of extra dialogue between Mark and me about every recording. Just visit patreon.com/thepianophiles to access it. There you'll also find a half-hour companion interview I did with Mark where he compares Golden Age sensibilities to more modern trends in piano playing. It's super fascinating, and I highly recommend that conversation, which you can also access on my Patreon page at patreon.com/benlottie. So whether you want to check out all the extra goodies or just support the work Mark and I do, consider subscribing to both our Patreons so we can continue bringing you free content like this. Alfred Cortot.
Cortot played like he spoke his French, extremely elegant, refined. He would just sometimes trail off. His voice would go up like this. And when we listen to the Chopin Third Impromptu, you're going to notice how things, these phrases just go up and they evaporate. He had a very distinctive sound, which we can better appreciate in his later recordings when, unfortunately, his precision was less. But what we can appreciate is the elegance, the refinement, the individuality, the creativity, and the swirling sounds. That's just kind of like, I imagine, cigarette smoke or cigar smoke sort of swirling around in a room while you've got the aroma of whiskey kind of, filling your nostrils. There's just this rich, elegant, dignified, noble, but very personal approach.
I want to transition to some more Chopin of his.
First of all, he also said that the pedal is like the third hand. And we can hear that here, where the way he adds tonal color through pedal is not just to obscure or to create that haze, which he sometimes does, but to create color. So we hear structure in all of these great pianists, and we hear the structure, where they decide to bring out, let's notice how this pattern repeats, and let's bring that out, but then not losing sight of the main melodic line. And so there's always, I always like to think what I would hope teachers would tell their students is, if you could only sing one thing from this passage, what would it be? Okay, now you can add a second thing. What would the second thing be? Okay, what would the third thing be? And then really prioritize, like, what is it that needs to be heard here in priority sequence? And then how is it that you develop the dexterity where you're really highlighting that with beautiful sound, with nuancing, with the right timing? I mean, that's technique.
Marcelle Meyer.
She worked with Ravel, Stravinsky, Debussy, Satie. She was the muse of Les Six. She recorded 17 CDs worth of recordings. She was the most unbelievable pianist. She's always in my top 3. She's so unbelievably underestimated and unknown. Harold C. Schoenberg, who wrote The Great Pianist, hadn't heard of her until I sent him a cassette in 1989 when I was 20 and he was, I don't know how old, and he wrote back saying, "I'm in your debt." There's something so incredibly rich, sensual, supple, fluid about how she plays anything from Baroque music through to the new music that she was premiering. Georges Bollet's student and assistant, Ira Levine, just said, she's a goddess. I've never heard her do anything that was less than exceptional. And I concur. The thing about Meyer is her trills are part of the melodic line. It's not like there's this melody and then you interrupt it with a trill, like a little jackhammer, and then you continue the melody. It's all of those notes are beautiful, they sing, and it's all part of the line. And that's music from, how many hundreds of years ago, and it sounds fresh and alive. It doesn't sound like old music.
Here she is in Ravel. I love that she doesn't stop. She never stops the line. It's just one long melody, which is what the piece is.
Ravel had timepieces in his studio. And for me, she's the only pianist who really gets that Swiss clockmaker kind of sound, right? This sounds like a musical box. This sounds like glass chimes. It doesn't sound like a piano. She won a Grand Prix du Disque in 1954 for that Ravel cycle. It's unbelievable.
Benno Moiseiwitsch.
Remarkable pianist who was one of Leschetizky's great pupils who, like the other great pupils of Leschetizky, they all sounded different from one another because that great teacher taught them how to play in their own way. Benno had it all. And I think he was really highly esteemed, but I think that he was even greater than people really recognize. He was one of the ones who had that flawless technique, but, in terms of not just precision, but the sound quality that he produced, there's always this rich beauty. And so, especially in the recording that we're about to hear, which he thought was also his best recording, and there's an amazing story behind how it was made, even when he's playing super rapidly and softly, each sound, each note sings. So it's not just that the note is being struck, it's being played and it's singing. He was the most phenomenal pianist. Moiseiwitsch recorded extensively, thank goodness. And he had wanted to record this piece for a while, but the producers refused because the composer himself had recorded it, and they didn't want to compete with the composer's own recording. So there was a session where they wrapped up early, and the producer, Walter Legg, who was also Dinu Lipatti's producer, said, "We've got like half an hour extra. Why don't you play something else?" And Benno didn't really feel like it. So he said, "I'd rather not." He said, come on, let's do something. So this little cat and mouse game ensued. And he's like, well, what would you play if you could? He's like, well, how about the Rachmaninoff Scherzo? And he proposed it because he knew Legg would say no, because, they didn't want to record this. And they haggled a bit, and he's like, okay, I'll let you record it, but you're only allowed one take. And background, Rachmaninoff had to try it 7 times, because back then there was no precision editing. You made a mistake, it stayed there, or you redid it. So Rachmaninoff did this 7 times, his own piece, to get it done right. So, they haggled a little bit, and Ben was like, okay, there was this lighthearted atmosphere in the studio where they're having fun, they're enjoying, playing music. And Benno sits down and he just plays it absolutely flawlessly. And there's all these times when you think, oh, he's just on the edge. Like, he can't possibly keep this up. He can't keep up this tempo. He can't keep up that lightness at that speed. And he just does. And it was so good. They had to issue the recording.
Artur Schnabel.
Yeah, famous recording artist who referred to the recording studio as the torture chamber. He was called the man who invented Beethoven by Harold C. Schoenberg because of that legacy of the first Beethoven cycle. He was also very important in bringing Schubert and back into the catalog, not just the shorter pieces, but Schubert sonatas. What we're going to hear, though, is an excerpt of him playing Schubert live because, again, Schnabel live is a whole other dimension, and there's not a whole lot of live recordings of him, not as many as we would like. He died in 1951. So, off-the-air recordings did happen in the 30s and 40s for some pianists, but it was much more common when there was tape in the 1950s. But there's just this dramatic depth and these incredible peaks that we can hear in his playing of this Schubert piece in a 1942, I believe, broadcast that I think is absolutely stunning. One of the things that Schnabel famously said was that, I don't play the notes better than other pianists, but the spaces between the notes. And it's not just the spaces between the notes, but the whole spaciousness and the whole, the arc that we hear of the rise and the fall. It's just so dramatic and powerful.
Dinu Lipatti.
So Lipatti was born in 1917 in Romania, died in 1950 at the age of 33 of Hodgkin's disease. He's one of the few pianists who appeals to, it seems like, all the pianists of different sensibilities, of different generations. So you speak to major pianists now, and you mention Lipatti's name, and there's this aura of reverence about him. But in his generation as well, all the older and younger pianists, everybody admired Lipatti. And he recorded officially only about 3 hours worth of music. And every note is a gem. But because he was sick, some of what he recorded, doesn't find him at his most robust. And the repertoire, because of recording contracts and everything back then as well, is a little bit restrictive, whereas he had a huge repertoire, and when he was really healthy, he could play very robustly, which is why I chose the Ravel recording that we're going to listen to today. The speed, the clarity, the lightness, the transparency, the rhythm. And one of the things we notice is when he accents things, they're not necessarily louder, or they don't break the line, or the tone doesn't break. And so there's this incredible balance of loud and soft, this incredible precision, and the rapid fire finger work is just incredible. And when you hear the glissandi that he plays sort of a minute before the end of this piece, that just shows, hold on a second, this guy had a technique that was so far beyond what most people, I think, refer to as technique. Those are graduated glissandi, so he's actually playing intervals and with one hand. That's not like, it sounds like two hands. I mean, it's just, how is there not blood all over the piano? And how the heck did he do that? It's just a next level superhuman playing. And again, it's just tragic that, if he'd lived another 5 or 10 years, we would have had so many more recordings, let alone another 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So remarkable pianist, one of the greatest.
Clara Haskil.
So Clara Haskil was Romanian as well. She only lived to 65, died in 1960, and it was just in the last decade of her life that she started really having a pretty significant international career. She'd been plagued by all kinds of health and other challenges, but was still well known. She's one of the many pianists who had a challenging life, and where we can hear the depth of emotion, we can hear how their life experience really informs their music making. And she was particularly known for her Schumann and her Mozart. Those two composers, we often have this blend of childlike innocence with a somewhat darker undertone. And she somehow always manages to communicate both simultaneously. It's just incredible. What can you say about that? It's just every note is like liquid gold.
Ignaz Friedman.
Polish pianist, volcanic temperament. His mazurkas are famous because he apparently danced the mazurka as a folk dance as a child, and so he understood the challenging rhythm of how to make that work in a way that's very different from what Chopin could actually communicate in a score, and that's a whole other, it could be an entire video just on that. But this nocturne recording is one that I remember reading about in Harold C. Schoenberg's book, and I was, of course, it took me ages to find secondhand, I think what Schoenberg said was the most perfectly proportioned Chopin nocturne recording ever made. What we hear is not just there's a gorgeous tonal colors, there's sumptuous sound, but the pedal effects and the balance between these two voices, where it really sounds like an operatic duet. There's this sensual dance between these two voices, and it's a whole other sound world.
Egon Petri.
He was one of the top 3 disciples of Ferruccio Busoni, famous pianist and composer. Petri had a very long life and recorded a lot, but not all of it, and this is actually a good segue from talking about Friedman, not all of it captures him at his best. He could sometimes be a little restrained in the studio and sort of a little bit, okay, let's make sure we don't mess up. So for me, some of his recordings are a little dry and perfunctory. And then you hear him in concert, and it's a whole other story. And you hear him in some of his recordings, and it's, sky-opening. And I think this Schubert-Liszt song that we're going to hear is one of the great ones.
way he kept that line at the end, even after pulling the rug out from under the sound, just what? Where did that even come? When did he attack that sound? How did he sustain it?
Speechless. I mean, it's absolutely astounding. It's certainly not dry and clinical in that performance. I mean, getting verklempt. I mean, this was really like just next level emotional. Like he's just pouring his heart into the performance.
Emil von Sauer.
Even though Sauer is known as a Liszt pupil, and he recorded both piano concertos, which is amazing, when he was 80, but he considered that Liszt was too old and he was with him for too short a space of time. He really considered himself a Nikolai Rubinstein pupil. But he did learn from Liszt, and he recorded one of Liszt's consolations at a tempo that today would be unthinkable, but it is documented from masterclasses, from, I believe it was Amy Fay who took notes, and that this was exactly the tempo that Liszt had brought up in the masterclass. And if I recall correctly, Sauer was with Liszt at that time. So once again, we have this whole tendency today that, it's dreamy music, so we have to play it slower and we have to play it, super hazy and so on. And that emotion is sentimental. Whereas one of the hallmarks of some of these older recordings is there can be lots of emotion without sentimentality. So it's not dripping in emotion, it's just emotion. It's like you can have a sweet cake and you don't have to pour maple syrup all over it. Actually, just the cake is enough.
Sergei Rachmaninoff.
Rachmaninoff, the pianist, was actually my gateway pianist into historical recordings, because it was that beautiful set that my piano teacher had with his gorgeous hands on the cover, where it's like, what do you mean a composer recorded his own music? And he was a great pianist at playing other people's music. The recording we're going to listen to, the Schubert Serenade, is where there's this kind of melting sounds, and you just wonder, how is this possible? On a violin, you can do a portamento, or you can do these slides, and you can do these kinds of things. And that's one of the things about the piano, is that you can't. And some of these 19th century born pianists somehow created these melting effects. It's hard to describe, and it needs to be, I think, heard. There's the beauty and soaring line of the main melody and that interplay between the two voices, and the beautiful tone. I don't think we hear piano tone like that anymore. There's the absolute physiological mastery that's combined with the incredibly attentive ear and the musical knowledge, and those all working together. so that there's that in-the-moment responsiveness. He's paying attention, and he's really being attentive to what's going on. How can you not then be drawn into that incredibly focused, inspired music making?
Joseph Hoffmann.
His recorded legacy is so challenging. So his early recordings are all short pieces because it was, early recording technology. That's what they did, short little 4-minute pieces generally. And then, he just stopped recording in like 1923 or 24. But he made some test recordings in 1935. Amazing. But most of what we have are live recordings recorded with his knowledge or without his knowledge, never meant to be released. So, and at that point, he was also a troubled individual. He had a drinking problem at times later in his life. And so what we hear can be inconsistent. And there are folks who heard him and said, between from the early 1930s through to the late 1930s, already there was such a radical shift. And then there was a real radical shift from how he was earlier. And there is still something to be learned if you can just keep all of these caveats in mind. At the very least, the sound that the man produced was unbelievable, and some of the musical effects. When you hear him play the middle section of this G minor prelude, there's this soaring line where it sounds like there's a third hand there. I mean, there's no way to describe it other than to say it floats above. And it's a public concert. His wife arranged the recording with professional engineers, but he didn't know he was being recorded. And this is just some of the most sublime, magical piano playing you could ever hear. Can't you hear Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto and just translate, there's some passages that say, oh, that's probably what Rachmaninoff had in mind, that kind of soaring line and that kind of pedaled, how do you keep that pedal auric glow while there's that soaring line happening? It's magic.
Marilla Jonas.
She had this really arduous life. And she's somebody who, like Haskil, she plays a Chopin mazurka, and you have the full spectrum of a human emotion that's there. You have the charm, you have the pain, you have the beauty, you have the despair, you have everything all at once. And again, with that absolute, technical on all senses, precision and pristine clarity with the spirit of the music coming out. You listen to 1 minute of Marilla Jonas playing Chopin mazurka, and your life has changed. I think the moment she plays these opening chords, I think you just hear, I didn't know that kind of cohesiveness, that kind of sound, and that kind of approach was possible. This is, again, it brings us back to what's technique. That's technique. What's required in terms of control, in terms of tonal color, and in terms of your inner world, your conception of the music, and what it is that you're able to bring out. I mean, the way she does the repeat at a softer level, how the timing varies, the balance of the chords, which note is first loudest, second loudest, third loudest, as I was speaking to earlier. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. And you can listen to it, and if you're not used to listening on these levels, you can say, oh, yeah, it's nice, it's pretty music. But, let yourself listen over and over again and listen to the magic, and then go listen to other people play that. And it's just not the same. Magical playing.
Solomon.
So Solomon was a British pianist who suffered a stroke in 1956 after having been, he was a child prodigy, amazing young musician in his real youth. Known for Beethoven sonatas that he recorded a chunk of before his stroke incapacitated him. We have a recording of him playing this delightful little 1 minute long piece by Deodat de Séverac that's where we listen to a musical box is the translation of the title. And it is a musical box. And what he does is, with this crystalline clarity, with a pedal haze, where somehow that haze stays consistent, and we still hear the clarity of each note. I have no idea how he's able to do this and how he's able to clear the pedal while keeping the haze and the clarity at the same time. I think it's one of the miracles of piano recordings.
Myra Hess.
So Hess, was a heroine in the UK because in World War II, she set up these wartime gallery daily concerts. She endeared herself to the British public. And she was seen as, she had a traditional appearance, and she looked, if I dare say, not, no disrespect intended, but, more matronly. She had a sort of, how she looked was more how she was typecast in the recording studio. She played Bach, and she played Beethoven, and she played Schubert, and, she played this and that. And nobody would say, well, let's get Myra Hess in the studio to play both Brahms concertos or, the Chopin fantasy or this kind of fiery stuff. Well, we've got live recordings of her playing the Brahms concertos, and they are, buckle your seatbelts kind of like, holy moly, who is actually playing here? And this Chopin fantasy comes from an American concert recording. And, if you were to put this on for a fan of historical recordings or for anybody who maybe just knew some of the names, and you said, just take a guess who's playing, I guarantee you nobody would say, oh yeah, this has got to be Myra Hess. There's absolutely no way that we can reconcile the public image and how she was portrayed and how she looked in her portraits and so on with the fire and the passion and the intensity. majestic, but also like, wow, fiery, passionate, She apparently played at least one of her, I think it was the second Chopin sonata in some of her late tours, and I really hope a recording shows up. Some people have commented on my Facebook posts that, oh yeah, I was there when she played it in Chicago. Did you happen to have a tape recorder in your pocket?
Rosita Renard.
Oh, you've got a treat in store. She was Chilean. She studied with Martin Krause, as did her compatriot Claudio Arau, who probably most people have heard of. She held him by the hand and walked him to his first lesson. She was a few years older, very self-effacing lady, lived in back in Chile with a, dirt floor house. Retired from performance, then after the war was brought back, she played some Mozart concertos, and then somebody booked her for Carnegie Hall in January 1949. And she's like, why would anybody want to hear me? And anyway, she went, she played, it was privately recorded, and 5 months later, she died of sleeping sickness because she was bitten by a tsetse fly. I've often used this recording to open up a lecture and I say, how would you describe this artist physically? How do you think they appear? And you hear this playing of Chopin's Opus 10 number 11, and it is just volcanic, passionate, intense, fiery playing. And I guarantee you, nobody would say that was a 5-foot-tall, self-effacing woman. Was not the only volcanic pianist out there. I mean, nor was Hoffman. I mean, this is Hoffman-esque and Horowitz-esque in a sense, playing from somebody very different in demeanor and character and appearance, and who clearly was a master pianist. And that Carnegie Hall recital is duly iconic and just an absolute miracle that it exists. And we have to think how many other such performances evaporated into thin air because they weren't preserved. And then how many other pianists like that were there whose playing was just never captured?
Wilhelm Backhaus.
I think anybody who grew up in the LP era had some LPs of Backhaus on Deutsche Grammophon or possibly on Decca. He was just one of the most prominent recording artists. And what's little known is that, he died in 1969, but his first recordings were 1908. He was the first pianist to record the complete Chopin etudes in 1928. It wasn't Cortot. He was 5 years before Cortot. But here in 1928, there's this, it's now one of my favorite all-time piano recordings of anyone playing anything. His own transcription of a Don Giovanni aria. And it is, it's like a Moskowski kind of showpiece. And not at all the kind of repertoire we associate with this phenomenal, intellectual, but also emotional and, very communicative pianist. But, generally the perception, he's this old man with grizzly white hair. And here he is as a young firebrand playing just exquisitely. mean, major goosebumps and spine tingles and everything. And it's just the passion and the sweep and the joy and just all of the emotions. I hope everybody will go listen to that multiple times. I usually put it on like 5 or 10 times in a row because I just can't get enough.
Harold Bauer and Osip Gabrilovich.
Yeah, so Harold Bauer actually was, one of the most important and first piano teachers at the Manhattan School of Music, but he was British. Fascinating autobiography, which sociologically and musically, I mean, everybody should read this. Left behind a few hours of recordings, wonderful, rich, beautiful sound. We don't have as much of him as I believe we wish, but we have even less of Osip Gabrilovich, who became a conductor but died quite young in the I believe it was late 1930s. But this recording of an Arensky waltz is considered by many to be like just one of the most gorgeous, sumptuous, elegant piano recordings ever. And they did a lot of takes of this. I can't remember if it was 10 or 15 or 19 takes. I mean, they did a lot to try to get the microphone placement right. The tonal colors, the warmth, the elegance, and, again, that pedal and the charm. There's just so much that's going on in this delightful recording. It's just one of the most beautiful piano recordings ever made.
It's like a spider's spinning a spider web or something.
When was the last time you heard anybody produce a sound like that? I mean, it's seconds ago.
To be fair, it's two people, so, Geza Anda.
Anda also was like multiple pianists at different phases, and he died quite young as well, unfortunately, he couldn't stop smoking. And he was a different pianist at different phases, a real firebrand in his youth. The recordings he made for a few years in the 1950s are the ones that I think capture him at his best. His Deutsche Grammophon recordings are very famous, complete Bartók concertos, complete Mozart concertos conducted from the piano. Yeah, they're good, but they're not as great as what we hear in the 1950s. His Étude symphonique from 1953, Brahms Paganini variations. Again, it's the kind of thing, as we've heard with some of these other pianists. Oh, I didn't know he could play that kind of music and that way. And this Delibes-Dohnányi arrangement by Dohnányi of the waltz from Coppelia, he had studied with Dohnányi, who is another incredible composer pianist. And the tonal colors and the wit and the humor and the charm, again, that whole blend of emotions and, flavors that's going on here is pretty extraordinary. when I've played some of his recordings at university lectures, more than with anybody, several students would say, I might as well give up because I'm never going to produce a sound like that. To which I said, you didn't know that sound was possible, so now you can actually work towards that rather than give up.